From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Schweiger, and welcome to Film Music Live, the show where you get to ask the questions to today's top composers. I'm happy to have you here. While they might not be related by blood, composers Andy Grush and Taylor Newton Stewart have certainly spilled enough of it in the horror genre they particularly excel in, especially in the company of literature to TV and film terror specialist Mike Flanagan. First joining him for the eerily crystalline killer mirror of Oculus before providing music for a deaf woman to be stalked in with Hush, then going back to Ouija, Origin of Evil, while scoring Waking Dream Nightmares alongside Danny Elfman for Before I Wake, the Newtons and Flanagan got into memorable bondage with author Stephen King for Gerald's Game, going on to fill the Overlook Hotel with psychic ghosts in Dr. Sleep. They then take on the darkly lyrical world of author Shirley Jackson and Henry James for the memorable Netflix miniseries The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor, all while visiting Flanagan's Vampire Island for midnight mass and telling dark tales with the Midnight Club. But that's only the preface for the most remarkable collaboration yet, as Edgar Allan Poe comes knocking by way of the Sackler family sins for the fall of the House of Usher. Finding a gorgeously haunting neoclassical sound with a rhythmic relentlessness a la Philip Glass for this twisted modernized take, the Newtons' visit to Poe's moral comeuppance territory is as beautiful as it is ghastly. Just as fearsome in its Chuck E. Cheese from Hell way is how the Newtons have spent their Five Nights at Freddy's. Director and co-writer Emma Tammy's movie adaptation of the infamous video game where a hapless, haunted security guard takes on a horde of kid-possessed animatronic animals. Combining retro electronics with a Big Boo orchestra and an overall sense of devilishly furry fun, Five Nights at Freddy's is a demonstration of just how many inventive styles that these bros have put into every conceivable genre. And now here are two darkly spiritual musical siblings who definitely make spending time in structures into impressive nightmares. Welcome the Newton brothers, Andy Grush and Taylor Newton Stewart.
Hey, Daniel.
Hey, Daniel.
It's great having you guys back. Well, I mean, congratulations. I mean, this is the third, Freddy's is the third highest grossing horror film ever, while it's also streaming. I mean, could you have imagined this kind of reaction?
It's pretty exciting. No, I don't think we could have. I mean, all along, from the moment we came on and all through it, you know, we, in all our discussions with Emma, it was always about making this be, you know, make sure that this is for the fans, you know, and we needed to make sure that we sort of lived in that world. So, you know, I think that on every project we jump into, we just kind of give it our all. So we're never really thinking down the road, like what it may or may not be, as opposed to just like what it is for us in the moment and what our sort of job is at the time, if that makes sense. That probably sounds real boring, but that's sort of how. Does that sound right, Taylor?
Yeah, I think because the fan base was so big, it definitely seems, you know, that there would be a lot of people wanting to see it. So we knew there was a lot of interest, but you never know how it's going to go, and that's kind of always, you know, what's scary about obviously films that aren't typical, that are unique, is you know, probably more scary for the producers. But yeah, it's always exciting when people sort of understand, they understand that what we're trying to do is for the fans and for the story. And I think that's what sort of, when that sort of world meets and everyone sort of gets it and they love it, that's obviously a huge satisfaction for everyone.
I mean, had you guys played the game itself before we even got this gig?
We played it after, like when this sort of started coming up, we were familiar with the game, but we hadn't, I mean, we can't pretend to be we know how fans are. We know sort of the world that they come from. We had to kind of ensconce ourselves in the world and learn about it. And it was actually really exciting for us because we got to sort of experience it in a way that I guess everyone who's already been a fan of the game has been experiencing it. And I'm personally really grateful that I was able to learn about this world and get into it. And I'm now a fan myself. So
I had family and friends who had been in it for some time. And so I knew about it. I knew sort of the structure and the plot and like what it was, but I wasn't an active player until I was late on it. But yeah, it's super awesome.
You know, what's interesting about the movie is that, you know, it definitely could have been this crazy slapstick, you know, movie poking fun in itself. And there are definitely those movies out there, but this takes a pretty serious and mature approach. How did that influence your score for this?
Well, I think the main thing was we really wanted to connect the audience to the characters, and there's obviously a lot of sort of the darkness and the sort of attacks and the aggressiveness of moments of what's happening on screen. But I think connecting to the characters and the emotion, because, you know, essentially without giving too much away, you feel for these kids and what has happened to them, and you feel for Mike, and you feel for these, you feel there's so many things happening in different stories. We just wanted sort of the audience to be invested in it. So when someone dies or gets hurt, it's more of a loss. It's more of a tragedy. And I think that was something we really wanted to connect. And I think Emma really did a great job of that.
I have to give this movie some points for having the first cut in half death I think I've ever seen in a PG-13 movie. And that brings us to our first question up from Louis Versinelli. There are 3 separate Mike stream sequences in Five Nights at Freddy's. How can you break down those cues? Basically, as Josh, the security guard character, keeps seeing more and more of these kids and their purpose becomes more apparent.
I think it's sort of, I don't want to give anything away in the film, but it is sort of a progression of sort of him understanding what's happening. And those sequences are all related while they all have sort of unique parts to them. Some are a little more violent, others are a little more ethereal. They all sort of blend into that dream world. And it's interesting because not directly related to these actual pieces of score, but leading into them was a real sort of interesting, it was an interesting time because we wanted to figure out, Emma really wanted viewers to feel like you are, going into how we are when we're going into a dream, which honestly, I feel like I even tried at night going into this, trying to stay with my reality as long as I could before falling asleep. And it's weird. Like I would ask everyone to try it. It's interesting. You will always wake up at some point and go, oh, damn it. At some point you just become unconscious, which sounds obvious, but we were really playing with the idea because it's really important. Like what goes on when he dreams is really important to everything that's happening in the film and in these sequences. So a real long way to say there's sort of 2 parts to it, the ethereal part of the dream sequence, and then the more violent attacky, which is some of this cello back here mixed with in the ethereal section, more sort of synth driven score and some chimes we have over here actually. So I don't know if that answers the question entirely. Taylor, did I sometimes go off track there? So Taylor, stop me if I did.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think as far as the album goes, we cut it up that way because there's just too many sections to make it one long piece, and the way the movie flowed. We always try to make the record kind of go in a chronological order that relates to, 1, hopefully a listening experience, and 2, somewhat relates to the structure of the film if possible. So I think that was why we have sequence 1, 2, and 3, and there's, you know, because he's having these moments several times throughout the film.
You know, what's interesting is that there are so many ways that the score could have gone, and it kind of does. And you know, you have this really awesome opening title with these kind of retro synths, and then you have, you know, the darkness, and then you bring in the kids' voices. How much of the, I guess, you know, because the parlor goes back quite a ways, and there's a lot of kind of nostalgic humor. How did that influence your approach as to when to bring in these elements to kind of get them in there?
The humor, you mean the nostalgic humor?
Or the humor as well, I guess, because there's definitely that in the film as well.
Yeah, I think the key is not playing the humor. I think the movie does a great job of that. So it's really just getting out of the way. I think, you know, the way the film is and the way it sits, we had to approach it in a very careful way so it didn't fall into being corny, and then it didn't go into being something that it wasn't. And I think key to is adding obviously tension and sort of terror when we needed to, because, you know, there was key scenes that were obviously very dangerous and the situation. And then again, back to the heart of the fact that these are kids and the characters, and that was really the key of the children's choir. And Emma was really, she really had this great idea about children's choir, and we love that idea. And so we sort of went with it, and there wasn't a lot of places to be super musical and bring in themes one after another again and again. So we had to pick and choose where we could do that. And that was sort of how, you know, it delineated where to do that in the film. And we brought in the children's voices all over the place, whether they're being scary, we had them like whisper and shout and make noises, and then of course, you know, hum the theme.
Now I've got a question from Parker Davidson. What were some of the more important factors or sound design in your tracks that would help elevate the atmosphere and the emotion of Freddy's?
Great question. I mean, I think going to sort of draw off what Taylor was saying, the choir was a big part of that. I think that we were, that was a huge part of it. And that was, you know, the movie is kicked off with that, and then we wanted to make sure that we instilled that throughout. So you'll hear that melody throughout the film, but then you'll also hear vocals being used as textures and effects throughout the film. So that was one thing. A lot of synthesizers and weird sort of processed synthesizer sounds that we would kind of go through and manipulate and produce. There's a lot of us playing our cellos and then treating those just single strikes and hits. We're not great cellists, so that actually helps in the case of what we were looking to achieve for this. There's a lot of that throughout the film. And then, as Taylor said, it's important to be sort of aware of moments that needed to feel, you know, the sort of first act of the film. Really, there's a lot of it's about Mike and his struggle and what's going on, and it's important to the whole lore of where we get to in Act 3 that you really feel for what Mike is going through. So that was sort of a big thing too, in sort of taking us through, or taking everyone through his life and what he's going through, and his issues of finding a job, keeping a job, taking care of Abby. Again, I don't want to give away too much. So yeah. And Taylor, what am I missing? I'm sure I'm missing some things.
No, we didn't have a ton of time to spend on this movie. We came a little bit late on the stage. So we had to decide on things very quickly. But the bulk of the weird sounds were organic capturing of either like cellos and processing cellos or weird sounds. And then a lot of it was synthesizers. We use an Oberheim for a lot of these warm swells when they would walk into the sort of the arcade and you hear these kind of warm swells. A good amount of synths were used. And then of course the choir, but that was pretty much the bulk of it.
Wow. How does this work? I mean, between you know, both of you as a team, like let's take Freddy's, for example, you know, where you definitely have a deadline that's got to get done. How does the whole collaboration work, particularly in this one?
Well, we have a central database that is updating constantly, basically on who's doing what, the basics of what key it's in, what, the structure, the themes. And in the beginning, we often write separate pieces of material to capitalize on just having two heads and then coming together, and then we'll decide on what to use and move forward with that. And it really helps. I think it's very advantageous for the filmmakers and the producers, because they have more options, more to choose. And it's really important to get to where you need to go very quickly, especially under a timeline like Freddy's was. So, and then we have things syncing overnight throughout the day as far as sessions and Pro Tools sessions, Logic sessions, and then we have assistants helping us keep on track. And so that's basically the bulk of it.
Yeah, and it's helpful to have two of us, because things have to be messy at the front, as much as like we always want to keep everything clean and neat at the beginning. Like, this is this theme and this is this theme. There's just always, we've just given up on being sort of organized at the front, because it can't be. It's just completely chaotic at the front of every project, because you're trying to find what the sound is, and you might think in your head like, oh, I know that this is what the sound is going to be, but almost always when you think you know the answer, you're wrong. So we've sort of found that the best way is to sort of approach a lot of ideas, and then the two of us kind of come together and start talking about the ideas and melding the ideas together. And that's a nice process, because then when we need to get to a place where decisions have to be made, then we can sort of start categorizing things like, this is for this and this is for that, and that's where things can start to get organized. But it's really nice to have a partner in crime to be able to, complain to, cry to,
The one thing is that, when we get to these kind of robots, is how I'm sure like maybe a kind of Terminator or kind of a metallic thing crossed your mind. How did you want to play these characters? Did you want to differentiate them at all, or?
Yeah, we did. They all have their own little elements that sort of make them who they are. Overall, in the beginning, we were trying stuff, and glitchiness and metal that was abrasive wasn't really working. It was a little bit too much. So we had to sort of, things that were more bowed, that were softer, and that approach tend to sit better with the creatives. And so we stayed away from that as the movie sort of progressed. But we did use sort of some machines that we took samples of that were sort of, metal factory, and we chopped them up and make them more rhythmic, and they would sit below whatever was on top, pulses and such. But for like Chica, we used horns, and we used a trumpet sound that was processed to make it sound a little bit like, it ended up sounding kind of like a duck, which was interesting. We used a certain sounds for Foxy, and that would kind of come and go, but it was all very, very subtle. I would say.
Who was your favorite?
Oh man, that is a tough one. I like the cupcake. Sorry.
Love the cupcake.
It's so little, and it's surprisingly, it's so cute, but so dangerous.
One thing I really have to admire about the film, even though you've got that awesome kind of Damien Omen 2 moment in it, is that it's really done with a certain amount of restraint. You really don't see the kills in this in the film, but man, you definitely feel it. How important was that for you to kind of capture the mayhem that you're not seeing, to really kind of slam that home?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, because a lot of the payoff of music you hear is a result of a ton of time spent on what's happening prior to the music coming in, because that's really where you get the payoff, is in what is created before the musical, let's call it a payoff, or a moment. And that can be silence, or that can be just uncomfortable sounds. It can be a false sense of hope or a false sense of dread. But that was a huge part of it. there's a moment where I'm trying not to give anything away, but Abby's having a moment where she doesn't want to be discovered by something. And we took a lot of time to craft how that happens so that you're really feeling the dread that she's feeling in that moment. And that was throughout the whole film, like how, sort of constructing, when we tackle a scene, it's incredibly important to recognize what's happening before the scene and what's happening after the scene and the context of where it is. And I think that, when you're in act one of a film, you don't want to give too much away, and you have to recognize where you are. Even if you want to state a theme of a character, you have to be aware that you're at the front of a film so that you're not being too, that you're being gentle if needed. So that the arc of the entire film and the music as it plays in the film feels like it's sort of cohesive to the film, as opposed to just like a hodgepodge of pieces of score, if that makes sense.
Very cool. And I want to give a shout out to the awesome people at Backlot Music for providing our downloads for Freddy soundtracks. So send in your questions. And again, it's interesting because it's like, when you think about the kind of the Deus Ex literal machina of these characters, it's a pretty troubling idea. How dark did you want to go here with that kind of stuff?
I mean, we went very dark and wild, and in hopes that Emma would pull us back. But again, we didn't have a lot of time, and she was very supportive and pushing us to do wild and crazy things, especially in the first round, and kind of narrow down what she was liking and what she wasn't. But it's nice to have that freedom to sort of, get dark when you feel it's necessary. I think we kind of, when we saw the film, we knew some ideas of where we wanted to go, and the use of sort of machinery and the use of sounds. But I think there was talks about what era, as far as where we were going to sit in, how much orchestra we wanted to bring in, how much 80s, 90s, like what was the tone we wanted to go for these. So I think it was, quick way to get to those spots quickly.
Yeah, and right on. Now segueing on to House of Usher. I mean, what an amazing series. And I think, you've done so much great stuff with Mike Flanagan, but this pretty much really is at the top of my list, and I think one of the great horror miniseries done at that. How did this whole incredible collaboration begin with Mike, and why do you think you guys just sync?
I mean, it began with Oculus, and from there it's just become, we just are so inspired by what Mike does, and he and his producing partner, Trevor Macy, keep sort of inspiring us by giving us these projects that are, these stories that are so wildly different, but also connect with, humans, and tell a story and are interesting and unique. And I think that, it makes it very, first it's always exciting, but it's always, it's scary too, because we never want to repeat the same thing. And we want to sort of give each show its own unique sound, so that if you hear one show, it feels like that show. And we've just had we've gotten to a place where we kind of have a great dialogue with Mike and with Trevor, and are able to sort of take in what they're looking to achieve and then throw options at them. And they're very musical, so it's a nice sort of, each project is like a new relationship. Even if you have a relationship with everyone on the job, each project is like a brand new first date, and you have to figure out, like, on a first date, if you just talk about yourself the entire time, you can't understand who the other person is. And I think there's a lot of listening that has to go on, and Taylor and I really appreciate the ability, or not the ability, but the experience of listening to the stories that Mike and Trevor are telling with these projects. And it gives us a big creative output. you know, with Usher, there's probably a good 2 hours of music that is not in the show, that is stuff that has its own interesting identity, but it's really about finding the identity of the show so that it all coheses. Similar to what I was saying about Freddy's, in the arc of everything, it all needs to sort of cohese. And I think we've developed a really great relationship with Mike and Trevor, and been able to sort of have that communication where we feel like maybe we're not on our first date on a project now, and you know, we're in a different phase in our relationship, but it doesn't mean we can take it for granted and you know, and not still go on a first date each time and do fun, you know, try new things and make them feel excited. I think that that's always, Taylor and I are always talking about on every project. Our job is to take in the information and then to have producers, directors, have them excited about what they hear. Like, oh, we told you we wanted this and you gave us that, but in something we didn't even expect. That's sort of what we feel our job is.
Wow. I mean, you know, you guys did a lot of memorable projects early on. And one I particularly like is Dr. Sleep, which is like, you know, someone says, let's do a sequel to The Shining. It's like most people would run the other way, but Mike ran right into it and I think made a pretty memorable film. And that brings us to a question from Aaron Cruz. I really enjoyed your work in Dr. Sleep. Was there any need to replicate the analog synth vibe of the original Shining score that Wendy Carlos and Red Cheryl Elkin created, or the Dice Array inspired intro?
Yes. Yeah. There was a particular section where it needed to be very close. And so I know Andy spent a lot of time on that, so I'll let him answer that.
Yeah, you know, that we wanted to make sure that we did that, you know, as it needed to be done, so that we didn't want to try to be fancy and tricky and cute and creative and, you know, reinvent something. We just wanted to try to be, you know, what it needed to be.
Well, it's the same. But the synth sound and the setup. I think he's talking about the beginning cue. That sort of
and that's we took a lot of time to make sure that synth sounded, you know, we were recreating it and re-recording it, and we did take a lot of time to make sure that the sound was legit.
The section over the overlook was substantially different. There's a lot of different things, and Andy can get into the nerdy specifics of that. but the very front of it is a lot closer because the synths are very close, and
Now, Dan would like to know, have you lads unleashed any of your numerous full tech devices in your recent score, like a past reference using Resonant Garden and Dr. Sleep? If so, details, please.
Yes. Well, Dr. Sleep was obviously a ton of that stuff. We used the mescaline and obviously the Resonant Garden. I'm trying to think about that. For Usher, no, because it was almost entirely orchestral. For Freddy's, no, we didn't use any of that for Freddy's. We used mainly Oberheim's, Moogs, and the chords, MS-20s. So nothing recent, but strangely enough, you asked that. I have been doing some sampling with some of they have a Eurorack that has effects, which is basically the same effects from the Resonant Garden, but just on a Eurorack. And we've been making some stuff for that for a project coming up. But other than that, no.
I've used some of Taylor's recordings of some of the full tech stuff for a show we're doing called The Devil's Hour. Taylor loves to record that stuff, so I've been using some of that for it, but just pretty minimally.
Yeah.
Now, before we jump into Usher, another one I really loved, and I think maybe Mike's most unsung film, is Before I Wake, where you collaborated with Danny Elfman. What was that like?
That was a wild ride. Not so much on the music side. That went relatively smoothly. I would say in terms of just that film, just, you know, getting released, and poor Mike and Trevor, all they went through with that movie. But as far as the film, I'm very proud of that film. I remember reading the script and was just blown away by the writing and the story and the emotion. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. But it was great. You know, Danny wrote some stuff, and we wrote things, and then Mike sort of decided what he liked and what we wanted to go with, and we just started writing away. And you know, there was this one really big cue at the very end of the movie that Danny was kind of focused on, and then the rest is stuff we were tackling. But themes crossed and connected, and it was great. Danny was, you know, a great writer to be working with, and obviously he's a legend and super talented, and so it was a real honor.
No, very true. Now, I think the one thing that really impressed me about USHER, it's really kind of a new sound for you guys, and in a way, it's really beautifully classical and rhythmic, and parts of it even reminded me of Philip Glass.
Oh, awesome.
That's great. I mean,
yeah,
I mean, you know, a lot of people don't know the sound that we've been doing for a long time. We kind of got into the darker horror stuff in the beginning of our career, and that's, you know, one thing always leads to another. But our backgrounds, you know, we come from a lot of other styles of writing. So, and both Andy and I, you know, we love this kind of style of you know, sort of this classical minimalism. And we actually had, it was actually way more florid at moments and more even crazier in the score. But we pulled it back a bit, so, you know, so we didn't just overwhelm the dialogue. But it was fun.
Yeah, there's Michael Trucco's character kind of plays this character that's kind of responsible for sort of everything that happens in a strange way. And that was one of the first scenes we tackled because he has this wonderful dialogue. And, you know, I think our favorite approach to early sort of demos is to play through scenes and just play at the piano or with a guitar, just sort of play around with things and capture all those things. So you can see what's working. But specifically in one of these first scenes with Michael Trucco's character, there's a ton of information that you're given about a character and feelings. And it was really fun to get to utilize some of those early sort of, you know, piano recital days in that scene to be able to sort of slowly play through the scene and make it sort of elaborate in places and move, like have, you know, it have movement in places and then die out and let the dialogue play through and then pick it up again. And that sort of became a big part of that score is, you know, moments of we would call them vrumps in our sort of playback sessions, the vrumps of like certain instruments we had that would sort of keep the train going through scenes, musically speaking. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, talk about dialogue. I mean, this, of all of the projects that Mike has done, I think this is the most dialogue driven, and the script is just great. It's like literally if Patty Chayefsky wrote American Psycho is a Sackler family horror film. This is it. And again, there's so much kind of wonderful cattiness to absorb from the dialogue. I mean, how did you want to play with it? Just again, where it's so important to listen to the dialogue.
I mean, Mike is a genius. He is such an incredible writer. And he, you know, he had a certain idea in his head, I would imagine, as far as how the music was to work. And so we just needed to find and latch on to that. We wrote a bunch of pre-score early on that to try to find some themes and ideas. And, you know, it was a lot of fun getting to that process, but his writing is so strong, and everybody who, you know, was on it, they felt proud to be a part of it, and they really wanted it to be good. And you can tell that across the board from all that, each actor pouring their heart out into the scenes and kind of making it their own. So it's a delicate balance to walk in some of those scenes where there was monologues or heavy dialogue, especially when there was any kind of counterpoint happening or some arpeggiation of, you know, that's going on with cellos and violins and back and forth or something, we had to sort of watch the frequency to not bump on those things.
Yeah, I mean, so basically with Hill House, you get you've dealt with different authors, and in this, it's like just an Edgar Allan Poe fiesta. I mean, did you even like kind of immerse yourself in the work of Poe, or just kind of do a quick Cliff Notes before you started this?
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
No, go.
I'm a huge Poe fan. I have, I love. There's so many things that I love, but I did sort of like take time out and like, properly read some stuff. And I know Andy did. He exhaustively took notes and all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's and even so, even all the knowledge you think you have, it's incredible how much more knowledge Mike had on things.
That's so true.
Right? Like how many little
Yeah.
Easter eggs that are, I mean, if you are really a Poe fan and know the deepest inner workings of everything, there are things in there that will delight on a third and fourth watch through. It's pretty impressive and awesome. I know he like every project, he put a lot into it, and it really shows.
Wow. I mean, this is kind of like a whole "and then there were none" setup, where everyone kind of gets their just desserts almost out of an EC comic, as much as Edgar Allan Poe. What was your favorite inexorable death to play in this?
Oh,
Oof.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I would say, just for me, because when I read the script and then when I saw the ending, when his sister comes up the stairs, I was just like, even though I knew what was coming, I was shocked by what I was seeing. So that scene, was very, very intense. So that, for me, I would say, I mean, she wasn't dead yet, but might as well be.
Wow.
Yeah, it would be. I don't think I could give a favorite death scene because they all have these.
Yeah.
They all have these moments that are just so savage. Raoul taking apart the whole condo. I mean, they all have all the way to the end when, again, no spoilers, but the final thing that happens, with the wall, it's all pretty brutal.
Yeah.
Now, Ivan at the Bond Music, it says you did so many projects with Mike Flanagan. Is it easy to work with the same person on so many projects, or can it be a bit difficult when working with a new director or a new team?
I think, as Andy, he had mentioned, I think it's the sort of the shorthand of knowing, how Mike likes to work and Trevor, and what they both sort of are looking for. I think the difficulty is that you can't go back to the same bag of tricks unless that's what's being requested specifically. So you always need to be coming with, new things, new ideas, new approaches. And that makes it a little more difficult, because if you listen to a lot of composers, they tend to use the same chord progressions, the same sounds, the same everything. And, you have to be mindful of that, especially working with someone that you immensely respect and the project they're doing and the way they work. So that part makes it a little much more difficult.
What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, it honestly, it pushes us even farther. A new relationship with a new director or producer, we're gonna try to do new things so that they don't say, "Oh, that sounds like this or that." And with Mike and Trevor, it's the same thing. We don't ever want to send them a first pass of things where they say like, "Oh, this is really great, but sounds like, Gerald's Game or sounds like Hush." We want them to sort of raise an eyebrow, even if I think that Taylor would agree. We would rather they raise an eyebrow like this is woefully wrong than this is just normal, or this is not original. I think, and that's sort of I think that's the balance that we like to strike. So it's it's very, I think we're both very appreciative for sort of the inspiration that they give us with these projects. And it's easier in a sense that we understand when Mike or Trevor will say they don't like or do like something, the translation of how, everyone communicates, we understand that very quickly. But as far as like the process of writing and recording to get to that place, it's almost a little more stressful each time, just because we want to keep raising the bar.
Yes.
And that's a tricky thing to do, because I think you don't want to be too over analytical with music. I think if you think, you stink. It has to feel natural, but you can't be lazy with it too. So I don't know what that means. I feel like I just said two different colors, and they're completely different points, but I think they get you to where you need to be, if that makes any sense at all.
It totally does. Now, Akira Komatsu would like to know, do you have some logical thinking way when you go into a tonal composition? Do you compose with guitars too? If so, let me know the process. I'm curious, because I was a jazz guitarist.
Yeah, I think all the things that you're told not to do in school, we typically try to do those things. And I think that I can't speak for Andy on this one, but I think it's more about how it's making you feel. So we'll write a pass, and maybe there's a minor second, or there's like something that's happening and this dissonance is building. And if it needs to be musical in the sense that it needs to work for the scene, even if the technicality of it is not necessarily what a musician would go for. It's about how it makes you feel. So, and sometimes we've done things where it's deliberately so difficult to play, but it's pushing, whatever the range of an instrument, or it's pushing a player to try something that maybe they would highly not suggest. And it lends itself to just, again, being this uncomfortable. And for this kind of music, it works out great. There was times where we, for instance, just doing harmonics and kind of having moving harmonics. We couldn't get the players to consistently play in tune for the whole thing, but we could get sections. So we ended up just like chopping a section, chopping it, and then connecting it, so it was all in tune. So there's different tricks.
Now, I mean, I had to say, because I'm such a huge Mask of the Red Death fan, that was probably my favorite episode in terms of graphic comeuppance, and the inevitability of what was going to come out of the events when you try to circumvent the water system. Tell me about scoring that whole deal, man.
I mean, that whole thing was wild. And Mike had it all in his head way prior to all of it, and had kind of brought it up to us. So, it's it was wild. All of it was wild, from, the songs involved to what's happening. I mean, yeah, I don't even know what to say about it.
I mean, yeah, again, Mike really, he had it really in his head exactly how he wanted it. So it was more about, trying to find out what he wants specifically and getting to that section. And, we both worked with sort of 9 Inch Nails stems. And we obviously we did a Wicked Game sort of reimagination. And then we had a little bit of score that came in. But for the most part, it was obviously very club, dark, morbid. And it was a lot of fun. Obviously, when you get to do things you don't normally get to do, it's always fun to play and sort of new baskets and try new things.
Yeah, it's incredibly fun to, the scene itself. If you just play that scene with no dialogue, no sound, it's brutal and violent and iconic and all the things. So to be able to sort of work in that world and get to work with, like a song like the Chris Isaak song, to be able to do that, to receive, I know like to get an email, you know, from the music supervisor, Justine, who was just so on point with this
It's
whole
amazing
process. And, you know, to get an email from her, like, hey guys, here's a link to the stems to Closer. Like what, like, you know, as, yeah, we're composers, but we're also like fans and have a history of listening to that music. Like, and so to be able to get this, I mean, I know I can't speak for Taylor, but I know that I just kind of like, we got the stems and I just kind of imported them first and just spent a good couple hours just listening through to everything. And then, you know, you get past that and you have to get into the assignment. Like, what is the assignment? And the assignment is there's a whole scene, you know, and getting into that. And I think we had a ton of fun. Like, I don't know any other way to say it other than we just had so much fun working on that whole episode.
Yeah, no, it's great. And, you know, you think that Henry Thomas is going to be the one likable character. Nope.
Yeah.
And boy, does he get it. How did he want to play again the inevitability of that pendulum for that particular scene?
I mean,
it's
yeah, go ahead, Taylor.
I mean, he's just so good. They're both so good, especially in that sequence. You know, Carla and him are just, they're just incredible. They're such talents. So I think it's about staying out of the way. And then when there is a moment for music, you better make sure it's unique. You better make sure it's effective. And like, you know, it's finding where that line is, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And on that, actually, you know, huge props to, you know, I feel like sometimes in this process, people don't know about like a music editor and a mixer and how they're involved. And in this process, relevant to what you were just asking, Daniel, like in this case, our music editor Snacky was always so good about like suggesting, hey, what if we slide the timing of what you guys have done here by a few frames this way or moving this here. And I mean, it's just incredible what sort of the team did on this project, and that scene as well as a place where things could sort of get manipulated and the whole team could sort of come together. And then in the final mix of it all, Jonathan Wales, our score mixer, just did an incredible job to make sure all of the elements really land with what's happening on scene, as opposed to just making it, you know, a musical or non-musical piece of music.
Yeah, I just love how Carla is just this wonderful constant through practically all of Mike's work. And, you know, it's kind of like is the reveal as to who or what she is. How did you want to play her character or interpret her character?
You know, we sort of, again, we wrote a lot of different ideas and themes. Some of them didn't work because the way you read the script and you see her as a sort of this iconic character, we sort of played her as, you know, inevitable, you know, what's going to happen, how it's going to turn out. Sort of, we played her with this sort of this, I don't know what's the word, but just sort of this emotion of fate, I guess you could say, whenever she was brought up. But it was very subtle, you know, it was very light, and that seemed to work best, and that seemed what Mike seemed to respond to. So we didn't want to play her very heavy-handed, and so, but yeah, I mean, all those actors poured their heart out so much. It was really finding the key moments to shine, and then to stay out of the way.
Yeah, the two kind of the character is, I love Mark Hamill. I mean, I've just never seen Mark Hamill like
He's
this.
a legend. A legend.
And I just love that scene where he gets a choice to make his own deal and doesn't take it. How did you want to play his character in that particular moment?
I mean, at first I think we overdid it. Am I right, Taylor? Didn't we?
Yeah. We scored the whole all those scenes we heavily scored. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Mike's always really good about, you know, he's got his finger on the pulse and was like, no, we need to tone this down a lot. You know, we don't want to, and it's true. And it's so correct, you know, and that's a good sort of example of what we've been talking about with like being aware of the overarching vibe of the project and staying within that. because at first we overscored that scene because it feels like it. You feel when you're in that moment, you feel like, oh my God, this guy is like, he's not taking the deal. He's like such a baller that he's like, I don't, you know, I'm going to sort of drive my own rig. But the bigger idea of what's going on there was more of what we scored, which was very subtle, super minimal.
Yeah, no, it's great. And of course, I think for me, the most powerful musical scene in the entire series is the one when Carl goes, no, there's some parts of this job I don't like, which is when we get to Annabelle, who's got to go. And it's such a really moving, and it kind of also reveals the humanity, if you could call it that, in Carla's character as well. Talk about the challenge of playing that. It's really this beautifully tragic, haunting scene.
Yeah.
I mean, again, we sort of, you know, we would watch the sequence and then we would write, you know, what we felt was working. Especially, we wrote pretty much in chronological order, and we already had a huge bag of themes that we were sort of going to, and we just again found that, you know, less is more, and how is it making you feel, you know, when we're watching it, as Andy said, you know, if you think you stink, like, how does it make you feel? And I think at the end of the day, Mike watches it and it's just like, you know, this is not the feeling I want, or this is what's working. And then, you know, we go out of no music or bring back a little bit. And it's kind of that approach.
Yeah. Timing was really
tricky.
More so than it's ever been. You know, like scoring is all about timing. You're falling into these pockets to help sort of either shadow the story, tell the story, move the story, whatever. But within this, it was very tricky to sort of come and go and not feel like you are in the way. That was a sort of a big undertaking to have these big musical moments. And then how are we gonna get out of these musical moments? Like, I'm obsessed with the way John Williams gets in and out of transitions. Like the transitions, like of course the themes are incredible, but like the transitions are always very tricky. You know, you don't want to feel like you're ending unless that's what is supposed to happen. And in this show, that was happening all the time. Like, oh, here we go. We're going. Okay, and we're done, and we're transitioning to something completely different, and we need to feel like the music is not present. You know, I think that's always the goal, to not feel like you're in the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think this actually might have the least amount of music you've ever done for one of his series. In a way, you know, when you think back to a lot of horror scores where maybe there wasn't so much music, do you think there's maybe too much music in horror films? And maybe this kind of shows that maybe music is more impactful in the genre when there might be a little bit less of it?
I mean, I think there's too much horror or just too much music in a lot of films in general, especially action films. And I think it's difficult when your senses are overloaded. It's like, where do you go from there? You know, I mean, how are you supposed to feel something if you're always listening to something? So I feel that a lot of times people use it a bit as a Band-Aid when it's too much, because they're trying to, you know, fix something. And I think Mike isn't trying to fix stuff. You know, he's very specific about his writing, his cuts, you know, the way it's shot. And so the music is also doing something. And I think that's sort of the point, is that, you know, a really, at least for me, a really well-versed creator of, you know, film or TV, is they kind of are knowing what they're going for, and they're sort of trimming off the fat. And so it's very specific. And, you know, music serves when it needs to be overwhelming. It can definitely do that and make you feel exhausted. But I think there needs to be a break.
What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I agree. I think that overscoring something is the quickest path to, you know, having problems, because it doesn't allow viewers to have their own feelings. And sometimes that's okay, and that's sort of our job in moments. But I feel like if you overdo that, to Taylor's point, it sort of exhausts the senses. And action scenes are the biggest thing. I feel like action scenes that have no music, I feel like are incredibly impactful. When you're hearing, punches land, or you're hearing sound design of cars or whatever's happening, I think that's very impactful. And there is a place for action score. I'm not saying never, but I think especially in the horror genre, less is always more, because if you're pointing a finger, you've already lost. You should be more sort of luring people in, so that there was the cartoon where like the smoke was like a hand that would like come get you, it would like, you know what I'm talking about? I'm probably too old, but like the old cartoons where like the crazy smoke would be a hand and it would come grab the nostrils of like Bugs Bunny, and Bugs would be floating through the air. Like, I feel like that's what you want to do. You want to be the smoke in the air that's just kind of like helping dictate and create and add to the vibe.
So when you look at just all I think maybe coming up at least 80, maybe 100 scores. I don't know, but where does Fall stand for you?
Fall?
Yeah, Fall, the House of Usher. Where does it stand just in all the work you've done?
I think we're super proud of it. That one was, Andy said, probably the most trickiest in terms of timing, because of just the humor, the sort of the drama, and the emotion, and sort of what was happening in the story. The music really had to at moments give a little wink, and that was like as far as it would go, and then get back to what it's doing. So that was a tricky one in terms of getting to that position. But I think we're both very proud of it, and I know Mike loves the music and he's very happy, and at the end of the day, we just want Mike and Trevor to really feel like it represents their show, and of course all the viewers to really like it. And we've had just an outpouring of people say how much they love it, to write to it, and it's been great.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely terrific. So I see that Mike is putting a whole other team together for another Stephen King adaptation. Have you guys started coming up with ideas for that already?
Well, Andy, the actor's been pretty busy.
We've started working on some ideas for that already. Actually, we're kind of deep into it right now. And I was down with Mike and Trevor in Alabama recently. They were crazy enough to put me in another one, so I'll make a very small appearance in this one as well, which is really fun. But more to the point, we have a lot of ideas we've kind of sussed out in the last like 2.5 weeks, and we're just about to get into some tracking of some of that stuff to present some stuff. So it's that scary time.
Well, again, you guys are doing an amazing job, and I think we will be terrified by your music for many more films with Mike to come. Andy and Taylor, I just want to thank you so much for joining us at Film Music Live. Stream The Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix, and spend 5 Nights at Freddy's in theaters and on Peacock. And thanks to Nikki Walsh and Kinyu at Backlot Music for their promos of 5 Nights at Freddy's. Thanks to Snacky Pierce and Zach Grossman. And a special thanks to our producers, Mark Northam and Dale Turner, our designer, Mark Banning, and Newton music editor, Snacky again. I'll see you on the next Film Music Live on Monday, November 6th at 1, as Carlos Rafael Rivera talks about conducting lessons in chemistry. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Oh, thanks, Daniel.
Thanks a lot, Daniel.
Great having you here. Thank you.
Look at the cat. Oh, he's great. He's right in the background.